Welcome back to The Watch, and I want to talk a little bit about Peanuts the Squirrel and the larger implications of what's involved here and people's reactions to this controversy and travesty. So in case you don't know, the internet, especially Twitter, has been in an uproar over the past few days over something that has happened. There was a influencer, Instagram personality. He goes by the name of Mark Longo, and he had a animal rescue pet squirrel that had become quite the internet star, especially on Instagram. He made fun, wholesome videos with this squirrel. The squirrel became quite the internet star, and this individual also runs kind of like an animal shelter / rescue type of ranch, and the revenue produced from the videos, the most popular ones was with, the squirrel, helped fund the animal rescue ranch. The tragedy didn't just befall Peanuts, there was also a pet raccoon. But the star of the video was Peanuts, and so what happened is a complaint was lodged regarding this squirrel that either the owner didn't have the appropriate paperwork. This is a wild animal and you need some type of license to own one as a pet. And as a result, the relevant authority came to the individual's home, and with the threat of force, the squirrel was taken from the owner and has since been put down. Killed. From what I've been able to gather from multiple kind of comments across the internet is that the claim is it was to check if the squirrel had rabies, and there hasn't been a definitive reason given as to why the squirrel was people are saying executed. Fair enough, the squirrel was executed, and I have not heard yet the legitimate reason to justify it, but confirmation has come forward that it absolutely has been killed. This has caused a massive outrage on the internet, rightly so, regarding government overreach and the level of authority the government and its various institutions and sub-organizations have in our lives. This is a personal kind of pet peeve of mine, the overreach of the government and how much overregulation we have in our lives, restricting our freedoms to a ridiculous level. And the event is important in the sense that it's causing a lot of people to wake up to think how unbelievably ridiculous this is. The squirrel Peanuts has been a pet for, I think, nearly 7 years. No issues. And it was just because some busybody lodged a complaint to cause the relevant authority to look into it, and then the authority decided, well, not good enough. Then the execution of the squirrel seems bonkers to me, especially if, the accounts say that the owner, which Mark Longo, I think is his name, was putting in the paperwork to register the animal. I personally think even that is a bit too far about, needing to register paperwork to have a pet squirrel. And they're worried about, it might have rabies. Dogs can get rabies. Multiple animals can get rabies. And if he has had the animal for 7 years, I would say that they could probably confirm that, there's no rabies risk and the animal is kept in a safe situation. The very concept of needing a license or regulation over a squirrel seems genuinely ridiculous to me. But this isn't the only type of thing that a government does to try and police people and force them into a regulatory system where you have to pay a fee to get back the freedom that they have taken away from you by their determination of now there's going to be a rule there. I feel this mentality, and I felt like this for years, this is just a recent example of it, is authoritarian and evil. It is a complete bonkers overextension of the purpose of government. And I tell you what, the more that stuff like this happens, okay, the more black-pilled I get on the whole concept of government. I'm still holding on to the reality that I do believe government serves a purpose, especially for law enforcement, if the laws are good and just and logical, that's gone over, the cliff with enforcing unjust laws and lockdowns and taking away people's freedom. But law enforcement is an important thing that a society needs, as well as national defense. Okay, there are, I still believe, important uses for government. But I tell you what, it's getting so ridiculous that if it's like a choice between over government and no government, right, where we get to have just freedom to protect ourselves and our communities, and by the way, communities would form kind of regulatory governmental bodies, the old village council and stuff like that, where they would hold common law courts run by the local area. I actually think that would be a much superior system and will probably have higher success and be able to officiate its, function much better with modern technology helping it out. That goes into a further discussion, which perhaps maybe I'll continue talk on and get back to, because it's just gone crazy at this point, where we're in a state that a person, you can't even chop down a tree in Australia without getting permission from your local council on your own land you own. You own that tree. That's your property, but you're not allowed to chop it down. And it's like, oh, we're trying to protect the environment. It's like, how does chopping down a single tree on my own property, which does not form a part of a forest or a reserve or anything like that, how does that negatively impact the environment, especially when I'm planting other trees as well? It's ridiculous. And there are so many examples of this stupid practice. And it comes from seemingly like new politicians come in, and for them to either make their mark, get legitimacy or something like that, they have to institute a new legislation, a new law or something like that, and that legitimizes or something like that, and we get constant just more rules, more laws again and again, and rarely ever are laws and regulations repealed. They're just added to. Happens very occasionally, but nowhere near to the level of the new laws and regulations that come in. Once upon a time, we had the freedom and ability to be autonomous and to look after ourselves. There should be an expectation on individuals to have common sense. And if they don't have common sense and they put themselves in danger, that's their own fault, and they should deserve to reap the consequences of it. We should expect people, generally, just have a basic common sense. And if they want to raise a squirrel that might have rabies, that's their choice. Shouldn't they have the freedom to gauge the risks themselves and choose what level of risk they're willing to go into without the government saying, no, we will tell you what risk is allowed. And in fact, if you want to, undergo that risk, you need our permission and you need to pay us a license to do it. Do you see the kind of Ponzi scheme type scam that governments so often run, where they see people doing something and they're doing it perfectly fine. They can choose the level of safety they want in their own lives, right? But the government says, no, we're going to regulate and tell you how to do it and take away your freedom that you had and then make you pay us for the freedom that we took away. I find it interesting that many governments are trying to do that with the internet. Thank goodness that the internet has gone so large that it's very difficult to do now, but they've done it before in similar things. Example, radio. Do you know it actually doesn't take that much equipment to broadcast a radio signal, and you could have your own radio channel with, whatever you wanted to talk about, okay? All you need is a powerful enough antenna, some base equipment that isn't that expensive, and you can do it. Well, if you want to broadcast a radio channel these days, well, you can't do it without permission. You need a license, a broadcasting license. Same with TV, by the way. The internet has broken that model where anyone can broadcast a show, videos to the internet without any regulatory approval. And you think the government's happy about that because it means we can break their narrative. So they've been trying to figure out a way how to lock that down again, create a type of license to use the internet. And Australia's been trying to do this for ages, where they're already trying to restrict social media access to teenagers, and you'll need a type of license to do that. And even more. Okay, so they've done it in the past with radio and TV. Okay, and it was a little more exceptional because even though the equipment was, accessible, it's a bit harder to get. Nowadays, everyone has access to a video camera if they have a phone and the internet, and so many people can do it, and they can broadcast themselves to the world. So thank goodness that has created freedom for individuals. It has created people to be able to share their opinions and their voice without regulation yet. Because you think the government doesn't want to regulate that stuff. We've seen recent attempts of them pushing in that direction. They don't like people having that type of freedom. And of course, it's another means whereby they could tax people for any number of reasons, right? To make them pay for a freedom they once had for free. And you can go back and look at multiple things like this where you need now a license to do something that once people could just do themselves. I find it really interesting when I look at history about people building homes. And a lot of people just, they needed a home. They could get a portion of land, and then they had the freedom to just build a dwelling on it to whatever level that they had within their means, budget, and ability, and to whatever level of safety they felt was adequate. And they would use whatever materials they had available. You can't do that now. You need to be a registered builder. You need to make sure the house meets all these really high standards, stuff like that. Back in the day, there was a thing called sod homes, where the walls of the homes were literally made out of sod. What is sod? Turf. The top layer, grass of on the ground outside, okay? And you would cut the top layer off, right, in a brick, and they'll stack the bricks and literally make sod homes because it was in a location where timber wasn't nearly as available. I think it was in somewhere in Canada or North America area. You can look it up, okay? And I found it really intriguing that, look at that, it was like they needed a home. They would just make a home with whatever means they had available, and people aren't idiots. They wanted a home that would not fall down, and if they approach it with a certain level of logic, you would make it easily safe enough, you test it, and you just do it. And, because of that, people could build their homes much easier than it is now. Now, because there are so many stipulations and regulations and building codes to build homes, that it costs an insane amount of money to build homes now. And what would usually happen is people would build their homes with the materials they have, and then they would have shelter, then they would work, be able to save up and build up to nicer homes, okay? Because there are standards, standards of quality in terms of building, and many other industries, by the way, that people do want to achieve. But to enforce it, that everyone must build to a standard, okay? And they claim it's because of safety, and not always, though. Even though if they claim the safety, there are many safe ways to build a home. That is not the way that the regulation state must happen. And we get locked into a system where it restricts accessibility, ability to build and make things, restricts freedom, and also restricts opportunity. And this is just, there's so many examples of governmental overreach and bureaucracy. And it gets entrenched in the systems we have because the people that get hired to enforce these regulations, well, they get paid. That's their livelihood. So they don't want that job to go. So they're going to do everything they can to justify their livelihood, their job and position. And that means doing their job even when it's completely useless or bonkers, even when it's immoral, like killing someone's pet squirrel. An example I came across is when I was in England. I was talking to a landowner, and he had land to make videos, do multiple things, and he didn't really work it as a farm, even though it was a parcel of land that could be farmed. And he didn't have any cows on it. But a gentleman came to his door one day and said, I need to see your records of your cows, how you log your cows. And it needs to be kept in what's called a cow book. And the individual responded like, I don't have cows. I don't need a cow book. It was like, the law says you need a cow book. And if you don't have a cow book, you will get fined. And it was like a bonkers amount of money, by the way, that fine would be. And so he says, I'm going to go away and come back in a month. And if you do not have a cow book, even though he didn't have cows, he would get fined a certain amount. This was in the UK. And so this individual, it's so bonkers, so useless. It's literally a useless job for this situation to enforce a logbook of if you keep cows on your property when you don't own cows. But this individual, well, he needs to justify his livelihood and job, and so is going to basically bully and oppress people and fine people for not doing anything morally wrong or even logically inconsistent. He didn't have cows, but he would come back and lay down a hefty fine on him if he just didn't have a book. And so this individual, he got a basic, stupid, flimsy paper book, notebook, right? And wrote cow book at the top. Nothing in it. The guy came back, do you have your cow book? Shows the cow book. He's like, thank you, sir. And he leaves. And you might think it's a small thing, okay? Not small when they're willing to fine such an excessive amount of money for forcing people to do something that was functionally pointless. But I'm sure he's happy with his job and his paycheck. He gets to walk around, go up to people, and, do you have a license for that? Like the broadcasting license for TV usage in the UK. It's bonkers. The UK is one of the most overly regulated, bureaucratic nightmare of a government that I've come across. But look, I'm in Australia. We're not that much worse, honestly. And so when you see all these examples of useless over-regulation, which restricts people's freedoms and legitimately ends up doing evil things like killing someone's beloved pet, how can you blame people for thinking that government was a mistake? Okay? Now, one of the responses that I've seen online about this travesty of the execution of Peanuts the Squirrel is that someone's going to bring in a new law to cause a mandatory waiting period or something like that to give people, the ability to lodge an appeal or get the right paperwork, stuff like that. No. How about instead of adding new rules and laws to our over-regulated society, we get rid of that retarded rule and law which gave the government authority and power to come in by the use of force to take someone's family pet by force and execute them? How about we get rid of that stupid law and just fire the government body or whatever institution is running it, okay? There is so much useless waste in so many organizations. It's in the government, but it's also in corporations. I mean, look at what happened to Twitter, okay? Where it's running better than it used to on a fraction of the manpower. Waste. And the worst thing about the government is that we, the taxpayers, are paying for it. There are so many people that end up, because I've worked in the government before. I worked for the Australian Securities and Investment Commission called ASIC. And it was data entry. It was one of the most painfully monotonous, awful jobs ever. But there were some good people there. And there were some people who just got off on the power trip of the management and the oversight. And they get stuck in these jobs. And the thing is, once they get hired, a lot of us were brought in on contract, which means once the contract is done, we will let go, and there was no issues with the government running into unfair dismissal claims. But the government is so worried about unfair dismissal, accusations or people pushing against it and everything like that so many people, when they get a proper job in the government, they're almost there forever. And it's really hard to get rid of them. And they end up just wasting time and doing nothing and fulfilling useless roles, even redundant roles. And they're just left there. And because they don't need to compete, which is another massive problem with government, a lot of government just says, no, public, private, whatever, you don't have the right to officiate in this duty. Private sector, no, we're going to take control of that. And if you try and offer any goods or service that does that job that we are saying we're doing now, we will fine you and ruin you, basically. And the government takes control over certain regulatory, oversights. And because there's no competition with anyone offering a more efficient way of doing it, it gets bogged down in inefficiency and bloat and wasting our tax money in this annoyingly pathetic and often useless, and sometimes now, as we've seen, oppressive and evil systems and organizations where it's It's a terrible, terrible system. And it gets worse as time goes by, with people just adding new laws, new regulations, new oversight bodies. And the bloat and waste just gets bigger, and the people that are in their jobs just wants to stick around and never try and improve things, because the private sector can't offer a competitive alternative. There's going to be some rare cases where a politician might come in and say, that's it, we are looking at the efficiency of the entire government, and we're going to take slash all the waste and stuff like that. They promise it, but I mean, it's interesting that Donald Trump has said that he's going to bring on Elon Musk, a man who is very good in private business, to be the head of a type of government efficiency oversight committee or something like that. That's brilliant. Yes, we need someone like that in Australia and in every country. Let's cut the waste. Because when we see things like what happened with Peanuts the Squirrel, all right, the response is, it's wrong. Something needs to change. We are over-regulated and then over-policed, and the government has way too much power. We want the government to friggin' get out of our lives and give us the freedom to just do what we want. Yeah, we want to chop down a tree on our own land. We want to do something simple that we should have every right to do. And the government's like, do you have a license or permit for that? All right, but we don't have that freedom. And so we want the government friggin' out of our lives. Stop regulating everything. Stop trying to police everything. And yeah, they want to police speech. What is hate speech? And there's been recent examples in Australia and otherwhere where people are getting, criminally charged for it. We saw, that's been happening for years, but even recently it's still going on. It's like, yeah, that's not freedom. Which country is truly free in that sense, right? And what can be done to change it? Well, yeah, getting the right person into power, but not every country kind of has that. And even then, I don't think enough is going to happen. Government has gotten way, way too big. And they are in our lives and meddling and being at, do you have a license for that? Way, way too much. Where historically, the only times when regulation, and this is the concerning thing, a regulation like this is almost reset or taken away, is when upheavals in society happen. Because you can only push people so much. And it's not to say that I don't think there's a role of government, but when you see constant examples of this vile, evil crap, large government getting in on people's lives and overtaxing them, over-regulating them, killing their family pets, you can't blame people for just getting fed up with it all. And the outrage is well-deserved. Now, some people claim that they have identified the individual that put in the complaint about Peanuts the Squirrel. I have not received that's confirmation, like any proof of that. The person that they're sharing around. And in fact, there's a video out claiming from a friend of the person that they're completely innocent. They aren't the ones related to it all. They didn't put in the complaint, and the reason why they made their social media, private or taken down is because of all the harassment they've been receiving. Now, I'm not saying the person who put in this complaint isn't, a pretty scummy person for doing it, okay, and not necessarily deserving appropriate criticism, because they absolutely do, but damn well make sure you know who did it, okay, before potentially criticizing the wrong person. And I haven't received any confirmation that the person that they're sharing about is the one who's actually done it. So I would encourage people to be a bit more cautious about verbally criticizing or attacking individuals. But the person who did do it, whoever they are, okay, again, it's this busybody Karen thing where are they getting off on a power trip? It's like, it's not affecting their lives personally or directly. There's been rumours, and they are rumours, circulating about as to why. And one of the claims, I don't know if it's true, but it does, ring true to lousy behavior is that the individual might have been jealous of the amount of likes that Peanuts the Squirrel was getting, where they have a social media company that they were trying to get successful and wasn't getting any attention. And it could have been an act of jealousy. And it very well could have. We don't have confirmation, but doing really scummy things out of jealousy and spite just because someone is being successful is an unfortunately common enough human reaction, which is sad and pathetic. And that type of behavior should be criticized and shamed to try and teach people abroad, largely, right, that type of behavior is bad and shouldn't be done, and there should be lessons learned from it. It does make me like don't have confirmation that was the case, but it could be something like that. And I've come across people that just like to enforce rules and laws that have no relevance to themselves. They're not getting hard or anything like that, and they just want to do it because they want, a sense of power to force other people to do what they're told and stuff like that. Now, this isn't enforcing real proper laws, right, that are important that everyone should try and support, like, stopping theft or violent assault or things like that, all right? This is a really scummy type of overregulated law thing, right, that doesn't have a good reason to exist. Like all the reasons they give, rabies and the dangerous wild animals. I'm like, come off it, it's a squirrel. And it goes back to the point I was saying, is like, even if there is some type of risk in raising a squirrel, individuals should have the right and freedom to choose to take on that risk themselves. Now, we could try and push this a bit further to, say, really dangerous animals like alligators, wild cats, lions, or animals that genuinely could potentially pose a true lethal risk to other individuals. That's where law and government might, yes, serve a role, because you should have the freedom to do nearly anything you want so long as it doesn't pose a risk to others or infringe on their freedom and right, okay, to believe what they want and do what they want so long as those beliefs don't impact freedoms, safety of others, all right? As soon as what you want to do impacts the safety of others without them being able to consent to take on that risk themselves, like, for instance, if you were to make your own home, right, and it wasn't up to certain safety, standards, okay, people should still have the, option to choose to go into that dwelling, understanding that, look, I'm taking on that risk myself, okay? The government has gone beyond trying to protect people. They're trying to protect people from not only themselves, but they're trying to mother people, baby people, take away, any potential. They're trying to protect people from offense, from being offended, from mean words. It's bonkers, because when I say, you should have the freedom to do what you want so long as it doesn't infringe on the safety and the freedom of other people, you don't have the freedom to not be offended. Okay, that's not an inherent freedom, okay? And that is not violence, as people might claim, or anything like that. Common sense needs to be applied to this. But that seems to have just jumped out the window because people are becoming so pathetic that they can't handle being challenged. They need their safe spaces. They can't handle being triggered. So they need to be protected by larger institutions, by the government, because they're babies. So going back to that point I was making about you don't have a right to not be offended, there's a pretty simple kind of standard which contextualizes this if people have trouble processing it, okay? Your freedom is about what you can do, okay? What you can express, what you can build or change in your surroundings. And in terms of what you can build and change in your surroundings, that's in regards to environments that are yours. There's a key point there, okay? So I don't have a right to call people names or say things that they dislike in their homes. They have the right to keep me out because that's their environment, all right? And I don't have the right to take away the freedom of autonomy they have over their home and that environment. See where these lines are? And so do people have a right to not be offended in their own home to an extent, but in the public square where people are allowed to speak freely? No, you don't get to take away my right to speak in a public environment, as I don't get to impose it on, other people. The only rights you have is what you control doing yourself. You can't control the actions of other people in public or in their own homes. Okay? And so if you're going to get offended by other people's behavior that isn't physically threatening you, okay, or restricting your freedoms of what you can express and do, okay, you have no right or power to restrict or take away other people's freedoms. It's as simple as that. It's not hard to comprehend. And that's where I think the law should also be focused around. But it's gone, again, off a cliff in terms of the ridiculousness. Where I could potentially see having a really dangerous, large, wild animal as a pet could be concerning if that pet could get out of their, their environment, the home where you're trying to keep them safe and other things like that. Because if they could guarantee that pet would be contained in a safe environment that won't threaten other people, I don't care. Let them own a friggin' lion or alligator or whatever, and let them take on the risk for themselves. People should have the freedom to take on a certain amount of risk their own lives, okay, because it's their life. They get to do that. But the government's like, no, we're going to determine how much risk we feel is right for you to risk in your own lives, to a ridiculous level, to the point that they're trying to control way too much. So much so that they deem a squirrel is a potentially dangerous wild animal. And if you don't have the right paperwork, even though there is 7 years of evidence that this squirrel is perfectly safe and friendly, no. We're going to take that squirrel off the owner and we're going to kill it because you don't have the right paperwork. Do you see how bonkers? This is why this is a good example. It's not good that it's happened, but the event is illustrating to many people how stupidly overregulated we are. It's a good example in that regard because it's causing people to kind of wake up and thinking, this is retarded. What society are we living in? What has happened to the government? Okay. And in Australia, and I'm sure in the UK and many other places, we probably have very similar laws like that. And in Australia, we're regulated on so many things of what we can own, what could be potentially a dangerous weapon, right? You're allowed to own a bow, but not a crossbow. Crossbows are too dangerous, right? You can have a really big stick, but nunchucks, and I think nunchucks are crappy weapons, right? But they're illegal in Australia, nunchucks, and a stick is far more lethal. I've made videos on it, right? Such useless, bonkers, stupid laws where people, it's like, we need to restrict this thing because it's too dangerous, even though kitchen knives are way more dangerous and deadly and we're not... Contradictions everywhere. Where will we go in the future? I don't know. Do we need a revolution? I don't want that. I don't want more conflict. I want someone reasonable to come into government and say, look at all this bonkers stupidity. It's like, just say, yeah, this is retarded. We just need to restructure everything because it's gone off the rails. What do you think? You think that might happen? The election really soon, depending on when you watch this video. We might not, what'll happen in the future. Oh, I don't know about Australia. Oh boy. What can we do, right? But still, I've had a lot to say all around this controversy with Peanuts the squirrel. It's a travesty what happened to him. And thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And as always, stay on watch.